Folks, welcome into another edition of SportsBookReview.com's Roundtable Series videos. Today, yes, we're talking hockey. It's been a while. Let me bring in my esteemed panel today, Ian Cameron and also Adam Booth. It's nice to talk NHL. Last time we grouped up and said, you know what? We think the NHL is coming back. Not a lot of plans. Before we dip into all the details here, Ian, I'm going to start with you first. Season coming back, maybe season in the works. Just some rumors. What have you been hearing, Ian?
Well, in terms of the NHL, we've been hopeful. I've been hopeful, but I've been also very, very doubtful and skeptical that we're going to see a season resume. Now, the latest, this is a critical week for the NHL. They're locked in these Board of Governors meetings currently going on as we speak all week long. And there are two issues at the heart of those meetings. One is being, can we resume the season, and how are we going to resume the season? The second being, do we host the draft? Because the draft is right around the corner, scheduled in June. Do we continue forward with that? In terms of the season moving forward, Donnie, there's the biggest proposal that's been put forth, and I think the one that everybody thinks is the most realistic approach if there's a resumption of the season, is this 4 neutral city Stanley Cup tournament, where they're allowing cities with NHL franchises to bid to the right, so to speak, to host some of these playoff games should they happen. Edmonton, Minnesota, Carolina, Vegas, Toronto are among some of the cities that have been named as cities that have been saying that they're interested in hosting these playoff games. But again, there's got to be so many things in place. You've got to have adequate hotel capacity. You got to have a practice facility next to the arenas where the games are taking place. You've got to have testing readily available for players, coaches, management, anybody flying in with these teams and participating. And then, of course, from the player standpoint, there's a legitimate divide and concern about what about our families? We're going to be separated from our families throughout this course of time, or are we allowed to bring them in to be quarantined along with us, which is probably unrealistic to do it. So there's a lot of hurdles to overcome. But right now, that 4 neutral city Stanley Cup playoff type of tournament is the most realistic proposal being discussed right now.
Adam, a lot goes into this, especially with the schematics and certainly setting up the schedules and stuff. There's a lot of rumors going around, like what could work, what could not. But the last time we did one of these roundtable videos together and talked about the NHL, it's been about 30 days. Not a lot has gone on over the past 30 days of getting some concrete ideas together, saying, all right, we're going to start training camp May 15th or May 31st, or we're going to hope to get back on the ice by July 1st. What are some of the rumors and some things that you've been hearing out there, Adam?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just reflecting before the show when the last time we did one of these roundtable videos was, and at that time the NHL was putting out weekly kind of updates. We're going to delay, and then it was like, no, we're going to give a 60-day return to schedule, return to training camps, and then it's been kind of radio silence for most of the past month of April because let's face it, at the time I was a bit critical of the NHL, saying we haven't seen the worst of it, and worst meaning coming out of quarantine across a 2-nation league with 31 cities. It's going to be a huge undertaking to even discuss bringing European players back over. Most of what I've been hearing is lots of ideas coming through with what players think of it, what general managers think, what league executives think, what networks that sponsor the league, like Rogers. And so everybody is kind of looking after their own interests, even on such a grand scale. And because they have to work in conjunction with local, provincial, and state and national governments to kind of come up with, here's how we're going to approach it. Here's some ideas for, quarantine cities that would work well, like my home city of Edmonton has been named. But they still have to work in conjunction with all these non-sports parties to come up with it. Edmonton is an ideal place because they don't have a huge international airport. They're very remote. And they've done a good job with working with conjunction with the Alberta Health Services to minimize and to quarantine. Bringing in a whole slew of people from all over the world. I don't mean slew, but bringing in people from all over the world to Edmonton before, we have confirmation that the worst is past and, we're ready to get going again. I'm not sure how many people in Edmonton, even including hockey fans, would be like, yes, let's jump on this right away. Given that, what would 20,000 people sitting in playoff seats for that whole duration look like? I know that it would be very exciting for Edmonton to have a huge conclusion to the season and be in the playoffs. It would be huge for the city. But everything I'm hearing is mixed messages constantly, kind of like what we said 3 weeks ago. And it's interesting to pay attention to, but very little stock can be put into what even the top NHL executives are saying.
You know what's interesting about this, Ian, because when we look at the NHL, and I always like to set the NHL aside because the passion for the sport, forget about it just being like Canadians, that's what they like, or the United States, and that's what they like. I'm just talking about the players itself. There is a want-to complete this season because growing up, there is no trophy. And again, being me, a major NFL fan, I still love the NHL, but there's no trophy that means more to these players than in the NHL than raising the Stanley Cup. And even if you have to get back to a best path forward, getting in the playoffs, because there's only a couple games left in the regular season, I doubt they're going to rehash that. Even if you had neutral site cities, is it something that the NHL would say, hey, you know what? Why don't we open up to all the teams and, maybe the first round would just be 3 games. You can stack them in these arenas to get back, but just getting back to playing, because you see some things that come out in the NHL and then, I don't want to come back until it's 100% safe. Hockey players are a different breed. If you give them a path and an avenue to get back to win a Stanley Cup, they're going to jump in here, Ian.
And the NHL wants to exhaust every possibility before they say we can't award a Stanley Cup from this past season and complete the season and get a champion in the record books. That's what they want, and they'll do everything in their power to do it. And they're certainly going to exhaust every possibility. We've seen it. Their initial thought, we talked about this in a previous video, was, as you mentioned, Donnie, including every team in a Stanley Cup playoff tournament type of deal. Now that's been shelved. They're thinking now maybe just 16, stick with 16 teams. Maybe you increase it to 20 to include the Rangers and Wild and some of these teams that are barely outside the playoffs right now, had the format stayed the same, and have them included in these 4-city neutral ice environments for the Stanley Cup playoffs, if it indeed happens. But yes, there's obviously TV revenue is huge. And from the NHL standpoint, and unfortunately for them, they're going to be hurt times 2, because attendance and gate revenue is huge for Gary Bettman. It's huge for Bill Daly. It's huge for the National Hockey League officials. And unfortunately, and Adam was mentioning it in terms of Edmonton, do you have 20,000 people in attendance? There's probably going to be no fans. I'm pretty much 100% sold on NHL, NBA, baseball, these sports that are having the chance of coming back before the fall, if they do at all. There are going to be no fans. So that is a huge, huge financial blow for the NHL, because attendance and gate revenue is even bigger for them, I think, than it is the other big leagues.
You know what's interesting to look at this too, Adam, as I bring you back into the conversation, looking at certain cities and what you can actually do, because I doubt we're going to have a team in New York City, or, hey, let's bring everybody to New York City. We got a lot of hotels and play this. I doubt that's going to be taking place. But you bring up the points of like Edmonton, even if you look farther south, like in Arizona or somewhere in one of those areas that they're not on top of each other. And, maybe some of the warmer weather cities, quote unquote, can kill off some of the virus. I hear that. But what about also taking a look at somewhere like in Canada, like a Nova Scotia, or somewhere a little bit farther out of the way, because we're not looking at arenas saying, well, we would love to play it in Toronto, big arena. We would love to play it in Montreal, big brand new arena. But maybe some of these places that are, still having like minor league hockey, or some of the smaller cities in Canada that doesn't have that big outbreak, they would be great spots possibly to put some of these games.
Yeah, I think if you're comparing the reasons for bringing it to an Edmonton or an Arizona, to a Glendale, yeah, you're right. But again, the Athletic put out a poll. They polled 50 NHL players, and 60%, so 30, said they want some regular season and some playoffs to play out for the season. 5 of those guys said they just want to cancel the whole season, and a quarter of them said they want to go straight to the playoffs. Now, this is kind of divided, of course, with most of the teams that are still bubble teams having some input here. But I do want to mention one of the quotes, an anonymous player was quoted as saying, has anybody thought about what not playing in front of fans will actually mean even to the players? And part of the celebration of winning a cup is winning for the city. How many times do we hear that? There's a parade. It's a huge thing for the greater area, all the fans worldwide. So maybe, if you have remote fans who don't get to ever go to a game or be a part of the celebration in the city, it's not a big deal to have the games in a remote location like a Nova Scotia, and it's all televised. But if you think about what the tradition of the Stanley Cup is like and winning it, and people always want to see it won in that home rink, that home arena, and then have the parade a little while later. Part of the enjoyment of winning it for the players, even though it means so much to them, it also means so much because everybody's around to celebrate it with them. Think about it as you win an award and nobody, friends and family, nobody's in attendance to ever congratulate you on it. It doesn't really have the same significance. And I think I hadn't even previously thought of that before I read that article, because I really, while the NHL, as Ian mentioned, is desperate to exhaust every avenue to see a conclusion to the season, it's not going to be the same level of hoopla and significance as previous seasons. So I still think that the NHL should be trying to, if they want to conclude the season, doing so when they can still do it in front of fans in attendance, because that's part of the tradition of winning the cup. Is you lift it up, you're in front of a packed arena, cameras are everywhere, your friends and family are in attendance, or your wife. These are all part of the celebration of winning a Stanley Cup. So I don't think we can just brush it. It's one thing to finish the regular season with no fans around, just televised. It's another to carry on a 7-game series with quarantine family and friends who are thousands of miles away.
No, it's a great point you bring up, because anybody that's ever been to an NHL game, forget about even the regular season, just take a look to the playoffs, a 2-0 fast break where the crowd rises to their feet. The minute that puck hits the back of the net, the explosion in the crowd. And if you're down 3-1, you get that late goal with 5 minutes to go to make it 3-2 at home. That crowd bounces right behind you and forces you back into this game. It's so much fun to watch, which brings up an interesting point, because you also talk about winning the Stanley Cup and carrying it around the ice is so big, even in the away arena. We're the worst here in Philly of having it perspective of we don't want to see anybody win. I've been to NFC championship games where, the Eagles have lost. I don't care who's on that field taking that NFC championship trophy. Even in Philadelphia in 2001, we lost to the Los Angeles Lakers. They always celebrate on the court. We were at home. They moved the celebration for the Lakers into the locker room because of how much maybe the Philadelphia fans wouldn't appreciate that. But I do remember when Patrick Kane scored in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final to beat my Philadelphia Flyers at home. A lot of people in the arena, we wanted to see the cup. It means that much, you're in. So we are gamblers, and transitioning over. A lot of teams were hot heading into the playoffs here, or figuring out winding down the season. Some teams were not. If we take a look at the odds that still sit here today, anticipating a comeback, Ian, the Boston Bruins plus 600, the Tampa Bay Lightning plus 700, my Philadelphia Flyers 13-1. Looking at some of these odds here, who do you think might benefit actually from this long layoff?
I was so super pumped up and excited and high on those Philadelphia Flyers of yours, Donnie, going into this break. They were playing such amazing hockey, and they were really doing it at a complete type of game. They were great offensively. Giroux, Couturier, you go on down the list. Konechny's had a great year. That entire team was offensively was doing a good job. 5-on-5, they were scoring. Power play, they were scoring, and they were getting it done defensively. Ivan Provorov's taken a step forward this year like I've not seen him such a rise so quickly with a young defenseman. He has the potential to be a cornerstone. We can build around that guy, type of blue liner for the Flyers, and of course Carter Hart, who might finally be the first answer for the Flyers in net since Ron Hextall. Carter Hart keep getting better throughout the time, but this hiatus came at the worst time for them. It throws off their rhythm, it throws off the momentum, and really that great play they had. So that would concern me about them in the negative direction, even though I still really like their game going into the break. I think the break benefits, in terms of who it benefits, Donnie, the Pittsburgh Penguins looked like a mess going into the break. They were 3-11. Believe it or not, in their last 14 games before the break. And all these deals they made, they brought in Patrick Marleau, they brought back Connor Sheary, who used to be with the team. They got Sidney Crosby back from injury. They were as healthy as can be, and yet they were winning games more when they were injured and dealing with all these absences and all these issues earlier in the season. And then they get all these guys back. Rutherford makes the trades and the deals at the deadline, and all of a sudden they're not playing as well. I think everything they looked so disjointed. Their defensive play went down. They weren't even scoring to the level we're expecting of the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think a reboot of the season, and keep in mind, if the season starts, guys, there's going to be a training camp. So it's going to give a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins a chance to work out the kinks, get some cohesion, get some chemistry. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins, of all teams, with them just playing such a bad brand of hockey going into the break, I think the break and the hiatus helps them. It could help the St. Louis Blues, the defending Stanley Cup champions. You think about the fact that they play a physical brand of hockey. They played all the way till June last year. They were going to play all the way till June this year. Well, guess what? They're going to be fresh as a daisy now if the season resumes. They're going to be able to catch their breath. They're going to be able to rest up, heal some injuries, heal the absolute physical toll that playing the number of games the St. Louis Blues have had to play the last calendar year has had on them. They're going to be a lot fresher if the season resumes, and probably a lot more dangerous as a result too.
It's interesting, Adam, because, Ian brings up some very good points. Some of those older teams, I always like to equate it to my experiences back in like the late 70s and early 80s when the Flyers would make the playoffs. They literally would send Bobby Clark to Florida late in the season to get some relaxation in before that long playoff grind. Now, everybody's going to be fresh, but certainly some of these younger teams can't handle it. Some veteran teams certainly will handle it more. It's not like baseball or maybe even basketball where you're getting shots up in your backyard. You're still not I doubt any of these guys have an actual arena in their backyard with ice that they can go out and certainly try to get their, keep that same level of excitement there. Talk about maybe some of these teams, Adam, that might benefit from actually taking this break and maybe make a run at the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I can't really think of a team that's not going to benefit at all from this, because the NHL, we talk about the marathon of playing in 80 physical games, and then if they are playoff bound, which the team, that's the only reason we're still having a discussion, if they are playoff bound, they could use the rest and recuperation prior to entering. So you look at teams like Colorado, who have been missing pieces of their top line all season long, and that's only going to be good for them to have all those guys back, the depth scoring at 100%. If you look at a team like Arizona as well, on the back end, they've been dealing with goaltender issues for 2-3 years straight now, and having key defensemen out at times. That's another one that came to mind. But I look at really every team, other than the ones that have clear momentum going into the playoffs, other than those teams like Philly, like a New York Rangers, other than those, I think everybody is going to, they might not be happy about the break. I don't think any NHL player is, other than maybe a Detroit Red Wings who season was resigned already. But I don't think there's any player that didn't want to see out the conclusion at the time that March 13th when it was canceled. However, they can still benefit from the rest and being healthy, having restructuring, like the Pittsburgh Penguins comment, if it's a retooling thing, if it's just, I'm, in locker room issues with personalities needing a break from that, hothead coaches coming down too hard, they just need a break from that. You'll be excited to be back in the rink. I think every team across the league, other than those that, we're putting together 10-game home winning streaks and stuff like that, or making a surge for the playoffs, will be happy. Even teams like Montreal, they've had half their season where they've, had letdown spots right as they're about to, get into a playoff conversation. Even a team like that could, retool and come back if we were concluding in October or whatever, and say we are more prepared than we were previous October. We still have a chance to get in. We're going to show a better side of ourselves. So really, the answer to the question is I think it's good for just about every team.
The business of the NHL, Ian, certainly still has to go on. One of the great things is some of these organizations or some of these leagues that are doing a good job. The NFL put on a very good and very clean effort to do the NFL draft. And you're also seeing things like this weekend going to take place with the UFC. We're hoping these things go certainly according to plan, and then other leagues will certainly open up. But let's talk a little bit about the NHL draft during this pandemic, because a lot of things that are taking place in other leagues are the same problems with the NHL. What day are you going to have it? Or are you able to get out scouts? Are you able to have your interviews, your workouts, and going down the list? The business, as I said, the NHL must continue. What are some problems that we might be seeing from the NHL with the draft, and is it planned to go on the same time as usual?
Now, this is a more realistic possibility that the draft will go forward. I think there's a growing sentiment, especially with Bettman and Daly and the officials, the head of the leagues, that they want this draft to happen. I think they saw the success of the NFL draft, the virtual draft, and it would be a virtual draft as well with the NHL, and say, you know what, we're going to have some interest. We're going to, and plus Sportsnet in Canada, Rogers Sportsnet in Canada, and NBC Sports Network in the United States have committed to the NHL, and they've said this to the NHL: if the draft goes forward, we're going to give you unprecedented number of hours of coverage for this draft. Going into it, We're going to do all these player profiles. We're going to do these stories on these players. We're really going to garner the human element of this draft and really show that on television and really promote the draft heavily. So I think there's an onus on the NHL. We need something good from a business standpoint. We need it right now. So we need the NHL draft to happen. Now, in terms of the format that's being discussed, because I do think this draft will happen, it'll be around the same time it was originally scheduled, late June. I think is probably when it'll happen if it does. But the format's going to change a bit. It's always, of course, points for the season for each team, and that's how it's measured. And your draft lottery odds shift based on your position, based on the points you have. Well, it would be points percentage because of the fact in this format, the tweaked format, because of the fact everybody's played an uneven number of games, to this point. So you have to be fair. They're going to measure it by points percentage. And believe it or not, there's only going to be one team allowed to move up in the draft lottery. If this draft happens, which is definitely unlike past years where I think anybody in the top 10 or 12 has the chance to move up their draft position in the lottery. Only one team would this year. Actually, the top 3 picks would be able to move up. But the thing is, with this year's draft, guys, Ottawa's got the 2nd and the 3rd overall pick in this year's draft because of the Erik Karlsson trade. So they're the only team that would be able to move up and maybe knock out the Detroit Red Wings from that 1st overall spot. And this is another topic where there's some disagreement. Steve Yzerman, the Detroit Red Wings GM, is in a position where if this draft goes through, guys, his team is going to have a better chance, not a worse chance, a better chance of having the number 1 overall pick. And yet he is still very, very upset that this draft could happen. He's got problems with it going forward, saying it screws up our offseason thought process. What are we going to do? How are we going to maneuver our team from a salary cap perspective? How is this going to impact our trade and free agent, dealings when we still haven't even sure if we're not even sure yet if we're going to have completed the past season and if we're going to complete the past season. So the business of a general manager, which they're used to having, they're set in their ways, that being altered is something that Steve Yzerman, among others, is a little bit upset and concerned about. So again, this is an issue where you've got teams and GMs on either side of the fence. But I think when push comes to shove, guys, we're going to have an NHL draft in June. I think the NHL is pushing really hard for it.
Yeah, I think they need to have it here. Adam, bringing you back into the conversation, talking about the NHL draft. We saw the NFL pull it off really well, but also the NFL was in their regular business schedule. They didn't have to push anything back. They were able to get their combine in. So a little bit different times and changes, maybe some weights on the organization, better have your P's and Q's in line. Maybe you have to take shots that you didn't want to take in the past. Give some thoughts here to the people out there on the NHL draft and what you think is going to take place.
Well, I think what was really interesting, and I consult for some American books, and they were taking a ton of action on the NFL draft. I think from a betting perspective, it would be pretty cool to have an NHL draft. I mean, I don't really follow NHL prospects that much. I do have a lot of friends that do, a lot of fanatic hockey fans that are, especially being from Edmonton, where who we have drafted has been kind of put right into the club the next year kind of thing for so many years. So many Edmonton residents do follow the prospects, but I guess from a strictly looking at the business side of what it could do for continuing content for the NHL, and as well, some betting avenues of, what teams are getting, I think it's interesting. I would look into it personally. However, reading the thoughts from the GMs who are the majority against it, that's a telling sign. And another issue is a number of current conditions are tied to 2020 draft picks. So these all have to be worked out. There's extensive work that needs to go into solving how the contracts will look on current NHL players tied to conditional 2020 draft picks. And so I think it's interesting. I think that it would be a lot of fun to have an NHL draft in June. It's good for NHL content, and it could potentially bring some sports fans to watch it. I know people that don't follow the NFL very closely that did pay attention to the NFL draft because they bet on it. So I think there is a case to be made for it's at least getting something done in this hiatus. But given that my view is that we're going to be on a break for quite a while, I don't know that there's an urgency to have it in June. Like the NFL draft, you were saying, its timing was more in line with when it usually is. And so it made sense to still get it done. With the NHL having such a pause in the middle of their season, there's so many things that need to be worked out so that it's an ideal situation for your Detroits and your Ottawas, but also for the losers on whatever's decided. So I'm not too keen for the NHL to rush into anything. I think June does sound a bit early, but the better in me and hockey fan in me would definitely be interested.
Perfect transition by Adam right there as we talk a little bit of fandom. Look, the reason why we do these videos, the reason why we do content, the reason why we bet these sports and cheer it on, we're fans at heart. We want to see it get back. It's been a while, and certainly shutting down. Look, we love the regular season, but we all wait for the regular season to end to get to the NHL playoffs and have some fun with it. Ian, just as a fan, what are you looking forward to here with the NHL? Can't hear Ian.
Yeah, I will say one thing. The NFL draft is a situation where it happened in the normal cycle, the normal business, the normal order of business, normal part of the schedule. The NHL Stanley Cup playoff, or the NHL draft rather, that's throwing the entire business cycle completely out of whack. So that would be something that they'd have to overcome. As far as being a fan, I'm excited. I'm definitely looking forward to NHL hockey being back. I'd be excited to see the playoffs again. The playoffs are intense. They're physical. I mean, the absolute grind of it, just the absolute intensity you have to go through, and then seeing the Stanley Cup raised would be something again. Again, if this comes back, hockey guys, it's with no fans. So it would be a concern in terms of, the language used on the ice with the players is very, very, it's not PG rated. Let's put it that way. So we're looking at a situation here where with no fans, the players are even talked about it. You may have to clean up the language a little bit on the ice between these two teams when they're going head to head like this. So that's going to be something definitely interesting to monitor if the season ends up resuming.
Yeah, just being a fan, Adam, looking at it, because Ian brings up good points as well, because we do want to be in the stands to watch these games. But I got to tell you, even watching from home as a Flyers fan or as a fan of any team, you're really excited to watch those home games, even from your living room, because of how exciting the crowd is. And you feel like you're in the crowd, even though you're watching at home on your HD TV. Just as a fan, Adam, what are you looking forward to with the NHL here?
Yeah, I live in a city here in England that just, 10 blocks away. No, it's about 10 blocks away. There's a soccer stadium, and on Saturdays you hear the goals go in and it erupts, and that's an exciting thing for every sports fan when they're living in the city. They know that climate, that excitement, that energy is in your city. I agree with you, and I am excited for the playoffs, but I have to draw a distinction here. I'm excited for the NHL playoffs that we know, and the ones with the packed stadiums and packed arenas, and the Tuesday night hockey night in Canada or whatever, and you arrive home from work and it's the Eastern Conference games are getting started right away. Then you've got 30 minutes before the Western Conference games start, and you've got the tradition and doing it the right way, meaning you've got all the fans involved and the cities are all, buzzing because, you've got 16 teams in the playoffs. They're all got a chance to win. That's the one I want to see. And so, yeah, I am excited for hockey playoffs, but no matter how the 2020 season concludes, it's going to look very different from what we're used to. So that sounds a bit of a pessimistic attitude on it, but I am just going to get ready for looking forward to NHL playoffs when this COVID-19 passes, and we'll see if my Oilers are in contention for a cup.
Yeah, it used to be interesting too, because I mean, even growing up as a fan as a kid, being in like 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, Sports Channel was the one we used to use, like watching the late night Edmonton Oilers games or the LA King games. We used to pray they would go into overtime because how much fun it would be being on the East Coast, watching a game at 1:30 a.m., 2:30 a.m. in the morning. Those were good times. We're all looking forward to get back. But for the sportsbook.com roundtable series video today on the NHL, you can see these guys want to get it back. For Ian Cameron, Adam Booth, I'm Donnie Seymour. For everything NHL, always check out sportsbookreview.com.